just say, look, we're planning on putting it in the basement. Where can we find them? Is it, what is it? Change that? I know you got a funky construct. Is it?
Always been.
It is Bill. At some point, it came up.
My favorite, one of my favorite moments, anyway, is the kid hitting the mother out there playing in the snow, and he's just, it just goes, well, it just goes. Then it just goes Thursday or something, and he's just staring out the window at him, and then it goes to the next day, he's staring at him all day. It's some funny moments.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's those common flowers here as well.
I also love when he starts to, it's just a simple camera move, but it's so effective when he starts to beat the door down with the axe, but the camera like swishes back and forth, and it just is.
30 seconds, y'all.
So it really like gives you the force of it. It's one of my favorite. It's a dumb, simple, dumb thing, but it's just so very effective.
I remember watching it.
Good morning. Thank you for being early. We are adjusting to the schedule on the floor where the last comments are being made before we go to vote. So thank you again for accommodating the floor schedule. Sadly, as you know, today marks the 5-year anniversary. 5 years since 20 beautiful children and their 6 extraordinary teachers were gunned down at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Our hearts are shattered, our resolve only grows stronger. 5 years later, in their name, in the name of the 90 Americans who lose their lives to gun violence every day, and the 120,000 Americans who have been killed by guns since Newtown, we will never stop fighting for common sense gun violence prevention. But as we saw with last week's concealed carry bill, House Republicans want to make this awful problem even worse. To observe the 5-year anniversary, it was observed here by putting forth, with stiff competition, mind you, one of the worst gun bills that they could put forth. We had, for a couple hours on Saturday in church, an interfaith service observing the 5-year anniversary and the stories of the families and the collateral damage that happens not only in losing your loved ones, but how sad it is for families across our country. They deserve better. We won't stop until we succeed. We're in it to win it. Everything that you can say, we're not going away until that job gets done. And by the way, all what we're talking about in the gun violence prevention legislation, which is bipartisan, King-Thompson bill, is to expand the background check to gun shows and internet sales. So most gun owners support that. But on the floor of the House, the wholly owned subsidiary of the Republican Party of the gun industry, we can't even take a vote on it. Instead, we're voting on concealed carry. Again, another bad news for the American people this week. The House and Senate Republicans met in secret to come up with a final GOP tax scam. Republicans have 2 bills, one worse than the other, that both raise taxes on tens of millions of middle-class families, while they're dishonestly telling people it's a tax break for the middle class. And instead of helping middle-class Americans, they decided their top priority was to slash imagine this, slash taxes for the wealthy 1% even further. In fact, it's not even the 1%, it's the 0.3%, smaller. By slashing top tax rate for the wealthiest Americans from 39.6 to 37%, Republicans appear to be handing an extra $150 to $200 billion tax cut to the top 0.3% of households in America. What? It's daylight robbery. And every iteration, the GOP tax scam becomes even more cowardly, outrageous, dishonest, brazen theft from middle-class families, giving money from them to the richest people in our country and to corporations. It's a monumental con job. They're not getting away with it. As you see, the American people are paying attention. They know, and they are 2-1 coming out against it. But nonetheless, that doesn't stop the Republicans from doing what is in their DNA, tax cuts for the rich. That's their purpose. When the Washington Post asked Edward Kleinbard, former chief of staff for the Joint Committee on Taxation, if the tax package in aggregate would mean middle-income tax cuts, he said, that's delusional or dishonest to say. It's factually untrue. The only group you can point to that wins year after year and wins in large magnitude are in the highest incomes. Mark Zandi, chief economist from Moody's Analytics, said yesterday, some of you saw our hearing of the House Democrats. We've asked for hearing after hearing, getting none. Of the House Democrats had another hearing yesterday. Mark Zandi was there, and he made these points. What the tax bill before does not increase economic growth. It adds to the debt enormously, deepens wealth inequality in our country, and does not simplify the tax code. So what is its purpose? Let us come together in a bipartisan way, as has been done before, to get the job done. This has trillions of dollars of impact on our economy, this bill, trillions of dollars of impact, done without a hearing, from the experts who can say what the ramifications are of what they are doing. No, they just did it in the back room and probably with their lobbyist friends, because that's where most of the information you get and what we get is from lobbyists. But as you saw in Alabama, you saw in Virginia before that, suburban Republicans are in trouble, very serious trouble. If Republicans think they have a problem now, wait until they raise taxes on millions of middle-class families and hand a tax break to corporations to ship jobs overseas. It's really stunning what they are doing. Instead of doing that, we should be working on a bill, our end-of-the-year bill, to address a list of urgent, overdue, and bipartisan, all the thing we're talking about here, bipartisan priorities for the American people. Funding for the opioid epidemic, increased funding for our veterans, CHIP program and community health centers, passing the DREAM Act, emergency disaster funding, saving endangered pensions, very important in our country. And instead, what are we doing? They're just totally obsessed with what their DNA requires, tax cuts for the rich. That's what their unifying theme is. That's why the Republicans, unfortunately, that belief is now tied to some very destructive, deficit-increasing, job-killing, middle-income robbing pieces of provisions in the tax bill. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, because as we gather here right now, is that at the Federal Communications Commission, they are considering a resolution that will be very harmful to net neutrality. I've written a letter to the chairman with concern, because they too have resisted hearings in what they are doing, and this is it's a situation that is let me just read it to you so that in the interest of time. I say in there, I'm disappointed that your office has ignored my invitation, but many other invitations for hearings to voice concerns about identity theft and the fake comments in the agency's record regarding net neutrality. Further, your office has consistently downplayed New York Attorney General's investigation into this matter and ignoring the alarming prospect that your agency's process may be fraudulent. Hundreds of people are gathered now at the FCC to register their complaint. You ask any member, their offices are being bombarded. Young people know what this means. This is about democracy on the internet. This is about good jobs for the future, and this should not be done. Even the technology officer, one of the people that Chairman Pei has appointed, has said there may be some, might be some flaws in how they are going forward. So let us hope that, well, I don't know if you remember, but when this happened before, when we were trying to interpret the law in a way that was favorable to democracy on the internet, the response from young people around positively supporting that was overwhelming. But as you know, supporting something is one wonderful thing. When you try to take it away, it's an explosion of such magnitude. Well, the FCC will see that. But this is very important to our economy if we want to have good paying jobs for the 21st century. I don't know what they're thinking. The only people with advantage of this are the platforms, the top communications companies. All of the entrepreneurial new companies coming up, all the young people who communicate and try to build, when I say relationships that will produce jobs on the internet, are at a disadvantage. Pay attention to this, okay? Now, we have this cromnibus that they're talking about. Some people are calling it the puntibus, just punt this down the road. I call it the nuntibus because it's not going anywhere. They're saying that they're going to put together a full-year appropriations for the Pentagon, and then the rest of the continuing resolution would just be the domestic budget as we go forward. Don't they know that, I mean, Chuck Schumer and 44 Democrats sent a letter to them this week saying that is not going to fly in the Senate. That's why I say it's the nuntibus. It's not going to fly. We can't support that. As I said to you last week, a third of the domestic budget, which will suffer from such a proposal, is State Department, Veterans Affairs, Homeland Security, anti-terrorism initiatives from the Justice Department. So a third of the budget is national security function, even though it isn't strictly defined as defense. So they're weakening our protections of the American people by going forward in this way. And of course, we measure the strength of our country in other ways as well, the education of our people, the health and well-being of the American people, even the nutrition of the American people is important to a good workforce. Some of you have heard the veterans in the last couple of days talking about how they would be harmed in the tax bill, or they're harmed in this bill as well. So the House, and they control the House, the Senate, and the administration. They need a serious plan for year end, and we look forward to working with them in a bipartisan way. But what they're doing right now won't fly. Any questions? Any question? Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chad.
Good morning. So on this funding bill, obviously they would like to do this on their own and try to jam it to the Senate. But is there any reason, and I know sometimes you and the Speaker and other people talk around here, you know, and there are back channel talks. Is there any reason for us to think, say, where he says, I have to do this for my side, and then we're going to come to your side, and what do you need? Do you need California wildfires? Do you absolutely need DACA? Have those conversations, back channel conversations, taken when they're running out of racetrack here to finish this bill and fund the government next Friday?
Well, the four offices, House, Senate, McConnell, Schumer, Ryan, Pelosi, are taking place with the White House all the time to try to find common ground. In the meeting we had with the president last week, we made it really clear what we brought to the table, because parity is the issue. You know, they're saying 54 and 37 are the same number. No, 54 and 54 are the same number. We are not opposed to the Pentagon getting what it needs to keep us strong, but again, we measure, as I mentioned, there are many national security functions within the domestic side, plus the domestic agenda. So those conversations took place. The five of us were there, the president and the four of us were there in that conversation. That wasn't necessarily back channel, but we made it clear. What we were bringing to the table were bipartisan. We didn't come up with some things that were a wish list. We came up with a wish list that is bipartisan. Opioid funding. The president has a proposal on opioids. If it's not funded, it doesn't exist. Opioid funding. Additional funding for our veterans, which is absolutely essential now. The issue that relates to the emergency situation we are with pensions in our country. Certainly the DREAM Act. The list is, but it's there are things that we have bipartisan support for. If they were on the floor of the House, they would pass anonymously. In addition to that is S-chip. But they put on this, I don't know what you want to call it, puntibus, nuntibus, cuntibus, whatever they were calling it, this thing that's going nowhere, it's a terrible version of S-chip. It makes children pay for their own health insurance. You're going to have health insurance for children, children's health insurance program. Let's take it out of children's inoculations. Let's take it out of prevention programs for children's health. Wait a minute, didn't we just give the corporate America up to $1.5 trillion in tax breaks permanently and unpaid for, and now the children have to pay for it, and it's 5 years, and they have to pay for it. It's not permanent. It has to be paid for. Now, we're willing to find offsets, but not from children's health. Children's health paying for children's health. And it's overdue, and it should have been done a while back. We are working to find a better way on S-chip. We're making some progress, but they've ignored that and just put in the same old, same old.
That White House meeting was a week ago today. I mean, nothing
Was it?
advanced.
What's today, Thursday? Yeah. Well, again, the staffs are meeting, and what you learn what is progress? Progress is you find areas of agreement. You also learn what you can't agree on, and that's what it is. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you about Congressman Kewen. There's a new round of allegations against
Yeah.
him of sexual misconduct. After the first allegations, I know you called for his resignation, but he's so far been defiant, says he's staying. I wanted to ask you what the next move for you will be. Will you move to strip him of committee work?
I've spoken on the subject. I think he should resign. He wants to go through the ethics process. That's his right to do.
Will you strip him of his committee work?
I've spoken on the subject. He's not a ranking member or something like that. Yes, ma'am.
Congressman Blake Farenthold has announced he's not running for
Right.
re-election in the wake of allegations like this. There was a second person who came out and said that Congressman Kewen repeatedly harassed her over a period of time while she was a lobbyist in Reno. Does that change your perspective at all on what Congressman Kewen should do?
McEwen or Farenthold?
Congressman Kewen.
I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think each case is each case. But in terms of Farenthold,
Accuser against Kewen.
in terms of Farenthold, we're talking about news reports of indicated environment rife with abuse and harassment in his office. These accounts from former staffers are shocking, unacceptable, and must be respected. Congressman Farenthold should resign. That's what I'll say on that. Yes, ma'am.
Democrats stayed just as united on taxes as they did on health care. And
Yes.
the tax bill looks likely to go through. What was different this time around? Why do you think the party failed to bring down this GOP tax bill the way it succeeded on health care?
Well, we don't have we stayed united, and we still continue that fight. I think this is a Pyrrhic victory if in fact it does happen. We don't have the votes to take it down unless some of the Republicans see the light. And people are speaking out, especially since they added the repeal of the mandate, the Affordable Care Act individual mandate. That has energized the base further. But this is who they are. This is what they came here to do, tax cuts for the rich at the expense of the middle class, at the expense of the health and well-being of the American people, and robbing from the future by increasing the debt, ransacking the finances of middle-class people by increasing their taxes, and rewarding corporate America and the wealthy. So I think they're in a lose-lose situation. If they don't pass the bill, they lose because you know what they've said about their donors are not going to answer their calls anymore if they don't pass the bill. So they lose in that regard. If they do pass the bill, they'll lose in the court of public opinion, and we have to hold them accountable. I myself would like us to defeat the bill rather than have the political advantage it gives us, because this is very harmful to the American people, and we have to stop it. And we haven't given up the fight yet. So I'm very proud of our democratic unity. It is our strongest message. It energizes the base, and the base energizes us. And the groups that are out there have been spectacular in pointing out what this means. And to remind, this tax bill triggers cuts in Medicare and Medicaid that the Republicans are already bragging about that they're going to do. Yes?
Just to pick up on Casey's question, does Mr. Q remaining in Congress hurt your message, the Democratic message?
No, I have to ask for him to resign. No, it doesn't at all. I've asked for him to resign right from the start. No. Yes, ma'am. But they haven't asked anybody to resign on their side.
If Leader McConnell strips out the defense bill, would Democrats oppose the continuing resolution in its current form as introduced in the House?
It's not it's what's not in it. What's not in it. So let's see what they send over. Maybe they'll add some things to it.
So you wouldn't support it in its current form if the defense appropriations bill was stripped out?
No. Let me be really clear. No. Okay. Thank you all very much. I'm sorry we had votes.
Giants want Billy Hamilton from the Reds.
How about this?
They're talking about this.
How about this? How about this?
Do you want Billy Hamilton to play center field for the Giants? It's a big center field in your park out there.
Well, as I said to the coach there, I won't tell him how to manage the field. He won't tell me how to legislate. That's so, yeah.
But you're a fan, but fans weigh in on it.
Sadly, we lost one of our biggest fans this week, Mayor Lee. It's really heartbreaking for us. I'm honored to participate in his services this weekend. But he was a Giants fan, a Warriors fan, continued to be a Niners fan, but mostly he was a fan of working families in our city, and he will be sorely missed. It's heartbreaking. Thank you.
Thank you.